It has been said that faith is not only the foundation of spiritual growth, but also the compass guiding our moral development. It teaches us that true virtue stems not from mere compliance with rules, but from a deep connection to values that transcend the self, inspiring actions of kindness, integrity, and compassion. Let's talk about faith and spirituality on today's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. All right, welcome to the Playing with a Purpose podcast, where we explore topics related to the moral development of collegiate athletes and young people as it pertains to character, responsibility, and purpose. I'm your host, Matt Barker, and today I'm excited to have another Matt with me, Matt Cook, Dr. Matt Cook, professor of Bible here at Freed-Hardeman. Excited to have him with us to talk about the topic of faith and spirituality. You know, I know this is something that Matt has talked a lot about in some professional development things, and he talks about, you need to start different classes and different things with a hook. I don't know if I did a great job of that, but I do have a guy that's really good at introducing topics and different things. So maybe he'll have a good hook for us to get everything started. Matt, how are you doing? Good to have you on the program.
Yeah, thanks. Good to be on the program. I do not have a hook. This is your show. You're
I
supposed
know,
to
I
have
should
the
have
hook.
had one. Well, the quote I used at the beginning, I think that'll serve as a little bit of a hook. It might not be the most entertaining hook ever, but it does introduce what we're talking about today, faith and spirituality. I think it'll be a good topic. You are involved a lot with teaching here at Freed-Hardeman. You teach Bible. You work a lot with our athletes. A lot of those are in your classes, but you're also a big athletic supporter. You go to a lot of the games, big basketball, baseball. Funny story, this is something that struck me as really funny, is the last basketball game we were at, and they made the baseball players move behind the goal. So it's like, well, who else is going to get there when the baseball player leave except for you and Jared Clayton? Let's just go fill in the spot. I thought that was really cool. I thought it was really funny. First off, that they made him move, but then also that, you're going to go and take that spot. I thought that was really funny.
Yeah, so this is a really fun topic for me because obviously as a Bible professor and a missions professor, that's what I talk about all day long, and I'm in church, but I love sports. So to get to mix the two of those in a conversation like this, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, it is. And I wanted to talk a little bit too. We talk a lot on this podcast about collegiate athletes, but really it really focuses a lot on just young people in general. One of the things that you do here at Freed-Hardeman during the summers is Horizons, where you have a lot of I think it's 7th through 12th grade, I think, is the kind of primary demographic for that, where you work with, they come to Freed-Hardeman, stay on campus for a week. Tell us a little bit about that and some other things you're doing here at Freed-Hardeman.
Yeah, so I direct Horizons. We have 970 or so beds for 7th through 12th graders, plus another 250 adults come in for the summer. And it's a leadership camp, so that's fitting for what we're talking about. Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. Obviously, my area here in teaching is in missions and church growth and world religions. So I love talking about that, getting to teach that. I preach at Stantonville, which is in McNairy County, and I love that ministry and the opportunity I get to minister to students there as well. So it's fun.
And there's a lot of students that go out to Stantonville. I know y'all have a full house every time they're out there. A lot of students enjoy going out there, and it's a great opportunity for them to have some different opportunities to lead that they might not have in some bigger congregations and things, and they really great opportunities for them there. We're getting into the topic today of faith and spirituality, and we really talk a lot about how different things can shape your character. And character is one of those things that everybody might define that word a little bit differently, but it's kind of what makes up who you are, what's your identity, and a lot of things can shape that. And one of those things is faith and spirituality. We see a lot of times the really cool thing here at Freed-Hardeman is we have athletes that come to Freed-Hardeman from all different walks of life, some not affiliated with any sort of religion or anything, but they have a lot of influences around them here at Freed-Hardeman. That could be Bible professors, friends, chapel service. There's a lot of different opportunities to learn spiritual things here. And one of those things is from Bible classes like that you teach, as well as other faculty that are, religious minded. So tell me a little bit about how you would define faith in the context of personal growth and maybe how that leads to moral development.
Yeah, so I hate to give a technical definition, but with a word like faith, there's so many angles that you could go at that from. My favorite definition is from George Guthrie. I discovered this when I was preaching through Hebrews last year, and you get to Hebrews 11, obviously a big discussion about faith.
Yep. And
so I'm just going to give you my definition. It's good. It's really helpful, I think. He says, faith is confidence that results in action. Boy, that's a great place to start. Mm-hmm. Confidence that results in action carried out in a variety of situations by ordinary people in response to the unseen God and his promises with various earthly outcomes, but always the ultimate outcome of God's commendation and reward. So if you get lost in the words there, it's confidence in that leads to action. But what I love is that it's confidence that leads to action regardless of the outcomes, right? And I think that's significant in sports because some athletes have been rewarded for their faith. I think of somebody like Tim Tebow, who's been very open about his faith. He's been rewarded for that. He's probably made a lot of money from the faith aspect of this, but he's also been made a mockery, right? People have made fun of him. And so from a spiritual growth perspective, I think faith is learning to take right action in different situations and knowing it's not always going to work out well. Right. But God ultimately will commend and reward. So it's like, okay, I'm going to believe and trust and act regardless of the circumstances and regardless of the outcome. And I think that's a big deal in sports because it's not always going to work out for you.
If a lot of times it doesn't. Yeah. So, and what kinds of things maybe shape that? You know, we think about faith, and there's that's kind of what we think of is this trust aspect and things. But what do you think are some things for young people, in specifically? What are some things that maybe shape that as far as how they have that faith?
Yeah, sure. Family has a big part to play in that, and so I think that's kind of the first line. I don't know if first line of defense is the right, but first line of offense if we're talking sports here. But I don't think, and then I think if, let's say your family, a teenager's family isn't real engaged in faith, then I think a church's youth ministry can play a big role in that. And then I think just showing up, I think sometimes we make church very ritualistic and checking a box, but think about the way that showing up at the church building 2 or 3 times a week for 18 years, how that shapes someone's faith.
Yeah.
Even if you're just going through the motions, but you go through that ritual, ideally you want your heart involved in it, but you do that for 18 years, that is very formational and impacts you for the rest of your life, usually in very positive ways, unfortunately sometimes in negative ways.
Yeah, and we think about, too, the aspect of competition. That can bring out positive things, can also bring out some negative things. We see it all the time when you're in the heat of the moment. The high pressure environment, there's sometimes things that are done. How have maybe you seen faith and spirituality can influence maybe the moral development of collegiate athletes specifically in these high pressure environments? We talked a little bit in the last podcast with Coach Elliott about how athletes have to deal with injuries and setbacks, right? And how they respond to that influences their character, and a lot of that has to do with the things that they have to go through really strengthens that character sometimes, but it also gives them a different lens of there's other things that I can do here other than just my athletic ability. There's people I can encourage and things like that. So for you, just from your experience, how can faith and spirituality influence the moral development of collegiate athletes?
Yeah, I think maybe the reminder we all of us need, regardless of whether we're competing or not, is that a Christian's whole life should be nothing but a visible representation of Christ. So if I can kind of get that in my mind, all right, everything I'm doing, I need to be a visible to other people, a visible representation of Christ. And I think it's possible to do that even while I'm competing. Like I think I can compete, I can have fun, and still represent Jesus. Where that becomes challenging, of course, is when things aren't going our way in the middle of heated competition, right?
Yeah.
There are intense moments that make it really hard to represent Jesus, even as a fan, but especially as a player, right? I've got bad stories of myself. I think about my senior year of high school. It was a tournament game. I was pitching, and it was our biggest rival. It was a district tournament, our biggest rival, cockiest guy on the other team, state champion wrestler, all-state football player, pretty good baseball player.
Yeah.
And I struck him out with some high heat, and I'll never forget. Of course, it was high school baseball games, especially back then in the hills of West Virginia, didn't usually get huge crowds, but this got a huge crowd. And so the crowd's going crazy. And I remember like striking him out, pointing at him and yelling, "Sit down!" What was unfortunate is that there was a coach from Ohio Valley University there recruiting me. And like after the game, he took us out to eat and he was like, "Yeah, it got pretty intense out there, didn't it?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm sorry." And I had to explain to him, that guy's the biggest jerk in the county when it comes to sports. But that was one of those moments where, like, I'm not sure I represented Jesus very well by, like, screaming at a guy to sit down. Or then, like, I think even about on campus here, intramural sports, how sometimes it's hard to, like, represent Jesus. Again, I remember in an intramural football game. Now, I know, like, intramural sports in the grand scheme of life mean absolutely nothing.
But it means a lot during
the... But it does mean... And so I remember getting some sort of bad call on me, and I was playing quarterback, and I just chunked the ball into the air. it may or may not have been like in the direction of the referee.
Yeah.
But like he bent down to pick up his flag and it hit him in the nose and gave him a bloody nose.
Yeah.
And like I played the whole like what like I didn't know what was going on, but that was not good.
Yeah.
And then even like at these games that you're like, you come to a lot of games, I embarrass my daughter.
Yeah.
She'll look at me and like shake her head. And so here's why I think this is important in athletics. If you can learn to represent Christ well in competition, especially when things aren't going your way, you're going to be more prepared for it later in life. And that's the value of this.
Yeah.
Like if we can learn to do this well in the heat of competition as a college athlete especially, then wow, imagine how that sets us up to represent Christ when things aren't going well later in life.
Yeah. And we talk a lot about too accountability and so collegiate sports, any sports team, you talked about your high school experience, the idea of looking out for other people as well, so that you have this accountability where it's not just me, I'm representing my team and all these different things. So in what ways do you believe maybe integrity and discipline from specifically spiritual teachings? You know, there's some things in the Bible we could look at that talk about this accountability aspect and how we're supposed to have integrity. We want to model what Christ wants us to. What are some things that maybe come to mind when you're thinking about specifically integrity that can maybe help athletes and just young people in general on and off the field?
Right. I think playing sports forces someone to learn how to be it's a testing field, if you will, for integrity. I think especially maybe the best sport for this is golf.
Yeah.
Like because you're on your own, you're keeping your own score, and so you are learning both integrity and self-control. So I mean, there's a perfect example of how like a sport will actually help you to grow in that. So my 12-year-old loves to play golf. We play often. He's in his first year of competitive golf on the middle school team.
Yeah.
And so like this is teaching him, I'm going to be a person of integrity. Can I lie? Can you lie in golf? Very easily.
Very easily, yeah.
Very easily. Can you very quickly lose control of yourself in golf? And what's amazing is like this whole integrity and Christian conduct, if you can learn through sports the art of self-control, not only is it going to help you to be like Jesus, it's going to help you to be more successful on the field, because if you can't learn to control yourself in athletic competition, you're going to lose your cool. You're not going to be as successful. I mean, golf is the sport that like, it's such a mental game. And if you lose that mental edge because you're playing poorly, man, you will continue to play poorly. And so I love that a sport like golf kind of teaches you that. And again, I can look back to I played 1 year of high school golf and it wasn't good for me. I remember the old foot wedge came out once or twice. And then another time, I remember I threw a driver. It's my sophomore year of high school.
I love hearing these stories.
These are terrible stories.
I love these stories.
Here's the worst part about it. I would never tell these stories, except there was another guy from our church on the team, and he told my parents.
Yeah.
So I will never forget like being sat down by my parents and be like, okay, two things. We've just heard that have you been using the foot wedge? And did you throw a golf club? And I got in really big trouble because I lacked integrity and I lacked self-control. And those were learning experiences for me.
Yeah. So we talk a lot about the influences that we talk about family, we talk about church family can help with this. But specifically thinking about those concepts of integrity and how you have this self-control, self-discipline, all those things. How can maybe coaches, mentors, possibly youth ministers and people that work at different churches that are working with these young people, how can coaches and mentors incorporate maybe some guidance spiritually, coaching perspectives, maybe just in everyday mentorship opportunities with young people? I
think it goes back to what we said a moment ago. If all of us are to be living representations of Jesus, then coaches ought to be, especially in the context of Christian athletics, coaches ought to be the person who models Christ most clearly to these athletes. And so I think the biggest thing is modeling Christ-likeness and positivity. I knew of a coach, won't name names, that somebody described him to me as Jekyll and Hyde. Off the court, he was super spiritual, super nice guy, loved him. On the court, his whole demeanor changed. He was miserable, is what he was. He was miserable. He was angry. He was sarcastic. Everything he said was cutting and negative, and the players hated playing for him.
Yeah.
And so, and I also think he wasn't able to make the impact on these players that he could have if he was the same person in both. And so somehow we've got to figure out, I'm not saying there's never a time to get onto your players or that the sarcasm or yelling never happens, but as a Christian who acknowledges that this sport is not the only thing that matters, I want to model Christ. Here's the tricky part though. You have to keep your job And so you have to win. And so somehow balancing winning with Christ likeness, you have to ask the coaches that you have on the show about that, because that's tough.
Yeah, and it's difficult for coaches. You mentioned specifically in the heat of the moment, they're the ones leading these players. It's also difficult for players, right? They're dealing with these same things with greater success. A lot of times you have this even more pressure. You know, I think about our men's basketball team. We won the national championship. Now we have every team that's going to play us. It's like, we're going to beat them. We know they won last year. We're going to beat them. It gets this kind of extra pressure on you. So you used the word balance earlier. You know, coaches need to have that balance of, we need to try our best to win and be successful and do the best things we can to have the most success to win, but we also need to make sure we're maintaining that integrity. So from a player perspective, maybe a player's that's struggling with this, the balance between character and wanting to win, what advice maybe would you give to them?
Think about this from two different sides of the coin. So number one, there's discipline. All of us, if we're going to grow spiritually, we've got to be disciplined spiritually. And I think college athletes have an advantage here because they have learned to be disciplined.
Yeah.
They would not be where they're at right now if they had not previously been disciplined in their sport. And so when I think about the average college athlete and the discipline that they demonstrate to get to where they are, I would say to them, okay, as you're struggling with this balance, how could God work in you if you apply just a little of that discipline you apply in your sport, if you applied that to your relationship with God?
Yeah.
You know how to be disciplined. Now, on the other side of that, and perhaps maybe more significant for a kid who grew up in church, is trusting God to work in you.
Yeah.
If you're a college athlete, how did you get to where you are? By your own hard work. You worked and you worked and you worked and you put in the time. And though you may have had a leg up because you had parents who had resources, whatever, you worked really hard to get to where you are. That can bleed over into spirituality, and we somehow think, well, I can get to where I'm at or I can get to a higher level of spirituality if I work really hard, and we leave God out of the equation.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's, yes, be disciplined, but at the end of the day, trust that God will work in you, that any potential you have spiritually is not because of how awesome you are, but because of how awesome God is and his potential to work in you. You can't do this on your own. There was a motto for West Virginia athletics. I'm a West Virginia fan. I haven't said my fandom stuff yet.
West Virginia.
Big West Virginia fan.
Yeah.
Big Pittsburgh. I've got a Pirates shirt on and I've got a Steelers mug on me. Like I'm wearing all of it on my sleeve.
Right.
So our West Virginia's previous football coach had this motto, trust the climb. Trust the climb. And I think when it comes to athletes, like, you trust your own ability to do this stuff and you trust the climb to get to where you want to be. I think we got to kind of flip that over and say, we're going to discipline ourselves. Yeah, sure. But we're going to trust God. So I would say finding the balance between your own spiritual discipline, which shouldn't be a problem for a college athlete because they are disciplined, but not trusting too much in yourself, trusting God to do the work.
Yeah. And it goes back to this idea is you're just one person. You have other players, teammates that you have to consider as well. Especially when you're in a team setting, you know, some sports are a little more individual, but when we're thinking about a team sport specifically, you're relying on a lot of other people. So when we think about collegiate athletes, spiritual development, contributing to this stronger sense of teamwork and sportsmanship, how can that happen? What are some things that maybe they can do to maybe contribute to that teamwork aspect?
I mean, this one's pretty simple to me. If you are growing spiritually, you're going to be a better teammate. I just can't think of any way you could oppose that statement. If you're somehow growing spiritually, doing the stuff that you got to do to grow spiritually and trusting God to help you grow spiritually, you're going to be a better teammate. And I think you'll be a better opponent. Yeah. Right. So it's this one, like, if you can grow spiritually, you're going to be a better teammate and a better opponent. Will it always be received well? No, not necessarily. Might someone give you a harder time because you're serious about your faith? Both a teammate or an opponent, sure. But at the end of the day, are you honoring God by your spiritual growth and being a good teammate and a good opponent? Yes. Yeah. And that makes it worth it.
And I think of verses, and I had thought of a couple before I came in here, Philippians 2:4, where you're looking out for the interests of others, right? If you have that mindset, you're going to be a better teammate because you're not just looking at how many points can I score, how can I get my teammates involved. The other verse that comes to mind is in 1 Corinthians 12, verses 14 through 18. The foot can say to the hand, I'm not important, right? Every person on the court, field, whatever sport you play is important. And if we have that mindset, then we're not just going to be looking out for number one. We're going to be looking out for everyone else that we're around. And again, it's like you said too, we're going to be looking out for what's good for the other team as well. Even though we want to beat them, we're not going to be somebody that just like kicks them while they're down either. Like, we're going to help them up. We're going to try to demonstrate those things. Like, we're trying to model our lives after Christ, and Christ is the best example of going to people that other people would not go near, right? And so it's kind of this idea of whoever it is that we're competing against, we have to still demonstrate those qualities. And those are just a couple. Is there any verses that come to your mind that maybe demonstrate that a little bit as well?
What's amazing is really like the whole New Testament, when God sends out his people to live on mission, to fulfill this mission, rarely, if ever, do they go on their own. It's always a team.
Yeah.
I mean, from the very beginning, what does Jesus do? He gathers this team of disciples.
Yep.
You go, like, read the Gospels, read the book of Acts. He sends them out 2 by 2. Like, read the book of Acts. Paul's like the hero of the book of Acts. Rarely, if ever, is he alone. He's always got a team with him. And so I think, like, the story of the New Testament is like, God doesn't want you to do this on your own. And so if you can learn how to be a good teammate from the stories of Scripture, that plays into this. I think about Romans 12, 3-5. For by the grace given to me, I say to everyone among you, not to think of himself more highly than he ought to think, but to think with sober judgment, each according to the measure of faith that God has assigned. For as in one body we have many members, and the members do not all have the same function. In other words, like, no one is God's gift to the team. Everybody has a role to play. And so learning to be humble is going to make you a better teammate and allow you, I think, to perform at a higher level when you acknowledge I'm not the hero here. I'm a part of a team. And I love that right now with, I probably follow our men's basketball team the closest. I love that every night you don't know who's going to be the leading scorer.
Yeah.
There's a couple of guys who tend to score, but like every night, like last night, it surprised me when I saw who the leading scorer was.
Yeah.
He hasn't been that most of the year, but every night it's a different guy. And I think that's a pretty good reminder of what real teamwork looks like.
Absolutely. And so when we think about, we talked about this earlier, but there's going to be times, whatever it is that we're dealing with, it could be in a sports environment where we're having a setback, we've lost some games, we're just struggling to find what it is that we need to win. Could be injury, right? We have setbacks because sometimes you're injured and you have to figure out how you're going to move forward. So how can having a strong spiritual foundation help athletes and maybe just young people in general deal with adversity such as injuries, losses? Could just be something personal going on. How could maybe having that faith and spirituality to fall back on in addition to their athletic ability help them?
So that's a pretty deep question if you think about it.
Yeah.
And really makes us think down to the core of our faith. And for me, it kind of does this. What is it that brings me joy? For most college athletes, they would say, my sport brings me a lot of joy.
Right.
It's different for everybody. And I think all of us have to ask, where am I at? Where do I get joy if I lose that thing? So for a college athlete, if they get hurt, let's say that you're a pitcher and your arm blows up and you're an NAIA athlete and you're not going to get the surgery. This is it for you. Like, where do you find your joy then? And so if we do not have that Christian foundation, then we're going to run into some real troubles in finding meaning and joy in life when we lose that thing. For the rest of us, it's those challenging questions like, what if I don't have my family? I mean, that's God forbid.
Yeah.
But like, do I really find joy at the core ultimately from my relationship with God? And I think for someone who's perhaps struggling with faith or who's not a Christian, I kind of view that as like a pebble in their shoe. Like if you can get somebody to think, okay, what if I'm not playing ball anymore? Where do I find meaning? Eventually, like if you can put that pebble in their shoe, what do you do when there's a pebble in your shoe? You may not take it off at first, because I'm too lazy to take it off. But eventually, you got to take that shoe off and deal with that pebble, and say, okay, like if I don't have faith, if I don't have a Christian foundation, at the end of the day, at the end of my sports career, what do I have?
Yeah. Yeah. And what can we do to help young people to have this perspective, right? So when we thinking about things in a different way, having a different perspective on focusing not just on sports, but also the spiritual aspects of your life and things that maybe can help that and help you athletically as well by having that. What are some things maybe that you could do spiritually? Some examples could be prayer or something like that, meditation, whatever it is. What are some things maybe you would suggest to young people and athletes that might be maybe struggling, maybe some things they can do to help have this balance a little bit more?
I think there's the obvious ones, right? So like getting in the Word, just read the Bible. Just so you don't have to read the whole Bible in a year because you're going to run into some stuff that's pretty tough to get through. Just spend a little bit of time in the Word every day. If you can just start beginning to learn to talk to the Lord in prayer, I think that's helpful. So I think all of those practices are key. If you can learn to be a person who prays, who meditates, who reflects, here's the thing. Will it help you hit more three-pointers if you're a person who practices Bible study and prayer? No,
Yeah.
probably not. But it will help you to respond in a healthier way when you aren't hitting three-pointers.
Yeah.
And so that's the value of it. Will it help you to be a better basketball player from a skills perspective? Probably not. But will it help you to be more resilient? Will it help you to stay positive when things aren't going your way? Yes. And I think if you can learn to be more resilient and more positive when things aren't going your way, that will improve your overall performance.
Yeah.
And so isn't it amazing to think that even learning to trust God in a deeper way through Bible study, through prayer, through meditation, through fasting, improves your resilience, improves your positivity. And turns out if you can grow in those things, that makes you will perform at a higher level.
Yeah, and it makes it better. One of the things I like about the NAI is they have this champions of character where they're trying to adhere to these core values: honesty, respect, responsibility, and the big one, like servant leadership, right? So if we're doing those things from a spiritual perspective, we're aligning more with what the NAI wants the athletes to do, which makes them more successful in just athletics, that they're successful in other areas of life as well. So that's really where I think the spiritual aspect comes in. It helps them have a lot of those other abilities outside of just athletics. This next question, I've really wanted to get your perspective on this, and I've actually kind of enjoy this question because you have a direct relationship with a lot of students here at Freed-Hardeman by teaching, just like we both do, but yours is a little bit different in that you teach Bible classes. So you have that direct, me teaching speech communication might not hit home as much as maybe getting to get into the word a little bit in the classes that you teach. So how do you think universities and athletic programs can better support the moral and spiritual growth of their athletes beyond just physical and athletic development? How can we do that maybe a little bit in the classroom and just maybe our examples that we set?
So in the classroom, I would like to say it's being just the best teacher you can be, and you're dynamic and energetic, and you make the Bible come alive. I think that's important. But what I've discovered is at the end of the day, they're probably not going to remember that. They're going to remember if you were compassionate with them,
Yeah.
if you were patient with them. I had a player a year or two ago who did not come from a spiritual background. He was in a class with a professor that I would probably say would be pretty dry. And so, because I asked him who he had for his Bible class. He said this certain professor. I said, yeah, how's that going? And he said, this is all new to me, and he has been so patient with me. He's been really intentional about helping me and helping me catch up and helping me when I had questions. So for him, it didn't necessarily matter how dynamic the professor was. It was that professor was patient and took time to engage with him after class, outside the classroom. And so that's something I can definitely learn from. For me, it's often like, okay, I'm going to go in here and create this awesome classroom experience. And then I'm really busy. Leave me alone after class. I don't say that, but so being more open to those conversations in my office when they've got a question about faith. I think for me, it's being open to outside the classroom conversations that happen sometimes in church, right? Where maybe they feel like comfortable to come to church because they know you, and maybe that's where you can get to know them a little bit better because it's not an academic setting.
Yeah.
And then I think mentoring, spiritual mentoring, or an athletic department providing spiritual mentors for their players could be big. And I think that could be helpful if it came from maybe outside the university setting. So I know of a guy right now, or a school right now, that's in the process of providing a Christian leadership program. It's a leadership program, but it's a Christian school. So it's going to be from a Christian perspective for their student athletes. And they're doing this by allowing a guy who's passionate about this, but also has the freedom and the financial flexibility to fund this thing. They've said, listen, we want you to start a mentor. You create the curriculum, but we want, for any of our athletes who are interested, a leadership mentoring program.
Yeah, that sounds great.
And so it's pretty cool to see that happen.
So, and one of the things that you mentioned this a little bit, but we don't talk as much about this, but athletes are super busy. And one of the things you mentioned, this personal aspect that you have with them, it's not always about what lesson you're teaching. It's just that understanding that you have with them. It's something I try to be, just from working in the athletic department. I know how busy they are, but they have to miss a lot of class, right? They have to have someone that is a little bit patient with them. Not that they want to miss necessarily. It's just they're gone for traveling for athletics or whatever it is. So I like what you said about just having that understanding with them makes a big difference. A lot of these athletes that we communicate with maybe didn't have a lot of that spiritual background. So having someone that is setting that example, that's understanding, compassionate, definitely makes a big difference. At least it's something that they'll remember later for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things I try to say to an athlete when they come to me the first day of class and say, I'm going to be gone, I say, listen, I'll work with you. I'll work with you. Don't stress about this.
Yeah.
You got to keep up your work. Another big thing, if any athletes happen to listen to this, communicate. Don't leave me hanging. Don't not tell me. Tell me.
Right.
Over communicate in a way that I even find it annoying.
Yeah.
Where I'm like, yes, you're fine. Don't worry about it. That's better than not communicating at all. So communication is just really big. And then I would say another thing, like some advice I'd give to, not that any of these guys will be listening. Maybe they will. I don't know who listens to this.
They're all going to listen. Yeah.
We're gonna force them listen.
Yeah.
Force them to listen. Give them a grade if they don't. So if you mess up, so maybe integrity has not been something that's as important to you, and you're growing in that, and you mess up, own up to it and apologize. I want to model the grace of Jesus that I've been shown, but I'm far more likely to demonstrate grace to you if you've messed up in an area of integrity, if you own it and apologize.
Yeah.
Don't hide it. If I catch you in it, acknowledge you're right and I'm sorry and I messed up. That's where I'm going to be more compassionate. It's the occasional student athlete that cheats and they don't seem the least bit sorry.
Right.
That's where I struggle.
A little bit of a problem with that.
We got a problem. So and really that's good advice for the rest of your life. You're going to mess up. We all mess up.
Yeah.
It's far better approach to life, and people are going to show you more grace if you can own it, acknowledge it, and express some sorrow for it.
So communication is key. Definitely. The other aspect of that is accountability, right?
Yes.
Take ownership for what you've messed up on. Take ownership of what you have going on, and let people know about that. They can't help you if they don't know about it,
I had a student, I forget what happened. I forget if he had cheated or something. So I gave him the option. I said, okay, here's the deal. I'm either going to give you a 0 on this test, or I'll give you another chance to take it, but I'm going to tell your coach what happened. He took the 0 on the test.
Did not want to deal with
coach.
Oh man,
which was a pretty funny story.
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. And we've all had, I think with integrity specifically in the teaching world, it's becoming more difficult because, just say you're writing a paper. There's so many things out there that can do things for you and very convincing. And it's sometimes hard to pick up on. And I've had situations like that in my classes. And usually it's the whole, we'll let you redo this for half credit, or we'll do, we kind of go through the scenarios with them, but it's just becoming so much more of a problem. And for people that don't have that faith and spirituality aspect, it's harder for them to really realize sometimes this isn't okay, right? If you have that faith and spirituality, you're like, I know that the Bible teaches us this is wrong to cheat and to mislead people, but sometimes other people don't have that background. So it's hard to you have to show a little bit of that grace and say, this isn't appropriate. Anything else you'd like to add before we're done? I know we've talked a lot about different things, faith and spirituality, athletics. Anything else that you'd like to share before we're done?
Yeah, this just came to my mind as you were asking that question. I think college athletes have a unique opportunity to model faith to kids. And my son, who's 12 years old, loves to go to these ball games, looks up to these guys, and occasionally I have to remind him they're not perfect.
Yeah.
They're probably going to say things that we wouldn't want to say, and so he'll occasionally be like, "How many of those guys? How many of them do you think cuss?"
Yeah.
And I'm like, "I don't know, son. There's probably more." And in the heat of the moment, that's tough, but it's a reminder. I guess I'm saying that as a reminder to these guys that there are kids who love Jesus, who are looking up to you, especially if you have been open that you take your faith seriously, that there are kids listening to what you say, even on the court. And I don't want to have to be like, when he asks, why did he get a technical, Dad? Yeah. I don't want to have to tell them it's because you cussed at the ref or something.
Yeah. So
just remember that not only is this between you and God, but there are kids watching you. And that's a cool opportunity you have to model Christ for children in our community.
Absolutely. Yeah. And they do have that. And I think of the Charles Barkley quote from I don't want to be a role model. It doesn't really matter. You are one, whether you want to be or not. And that's a good point. All right. Well, thanks for joining me, Matt. I really appreciate it. A lot of good things we talked about today. And I think it'll be very beneficial. It's been a lot of fun too. So
thanks for having me. It's fun.
And we probably will be doing this a little bit more in the future. We'll have a podcast that we're starting. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I think I will get to talk to Matt a little bit more with that. So, well, thanks for joining us for this week's episode of the Playing with a Purpose podcast. Special thanks again to Dr. Matt Cook for being my guest this week. Be sure to check out this episode and future episodes on Spotify or anywhere you listen to podcasts. You can also catch the Playing with a Purpose podcast on the Ministry League Podcast Network, the Freed-Hardeman Athletics Champions of Character website at gofhulions.com/champions of character, and the NAIA Champions of Character website at naia.org/champions of character. Join us for our next episode as I talk with Freed-Hardeman Communication Professor Dr. Janine Dunlap on the topic of public image and integrity. And remember, winning isn't just about the scoreboard, it's about the character we build along the way. We'll see you next time on the Playing with a Purpose podcast.